Today, let's talk about the most frustrating discussion in AI circles, at least to me. That is, can LLMs think? Can they reason? Can they understand? So here's Jeffrey Ladish. I believe that's how it's pronounced. He's saying for people who think that AIs aren't really reasoning, don't really understand things, or can't really think, what do you mean? Like, how do I test whether an AI can do those things? Now, I knew I was going to be aggravated before I even clicked to see the responses to that tweet, and I decided to retweet it and kind of say that I'll make a prediction. Not one person will comment with an actual proposal for a test for whether AI can reason or not. Most will say some version of the following. AI can't reason because it's just something something. I love this take by Scott Aronson, who worked with Google on their quantum supremacy project, who also worked at OpenAI on AI safety. He worked alongside Ilya Sutskever. He talks about this as people that practice the justaism religion. AI can't do X, Y, or Z because it's just a stochastic parrot. It's just a next token predictor. It's just a this or just a that. These people never stop and think, what am I just a? So I wrote that without looking at the comments, but I just want to briefly show you. So the very first comments, LLMs are just giant Plinko boards choosing which story you get, right? So they're just this. And by the way, there's different ways to say just here. For example, this person's saying AI basically picks tokens based on known relationships that match existing patterns, right? So it's just this thing. If it can't explain the why behind its answer, not just the what, it demonstrates understanding. Okay, so it just says the what, not the why. Here somebody's saying it's just mechanistic processing. Here somebody says, well, thinking is tied to chemical processes. This is demonstrable. Computers lack these chemical processes. Is thinking tied to just chemical processes? It's how can we demonstrate that? But the point is that they're saying like they don't have these chemical processes. They're just digital or whatever. So it's another way of saying the same thing. Most of these will be some form of justaism. So think of it this way. If we asked, can the following things, can they reason? And we asked people out there, can humans reason? I feel like most people would say yes. Like in general, does that class of objects or species or whatever you say, in general, does it have the ability to reason? Yes. Yes, it does. You can find examples where people can't reason, still doesn't disprove that humans in general can reason. If we ask, can a rock reason? Most people would say no, rocks cannot reason. They don't have the ability to reason. Then we get to LLMs, and this is where people lose their freaking minds. A lot of people get very unreasonable when talking about this. I've said this before. I believe it comes from fear. People get really irrational really fast when we approach this subject. By the way, how do I prove to you that humans can reason? I show you one or more examples of humans reasoning. How do I show you that rocks can reason? I would show you an example of a rock reasoning. I haven't seen that before, so I assume that they can't because there's no example to disprove that. Same thing if we want to know if birds can fly. We think that birds can fly. Why? Because we've seen a bird fly. So we can kind of test for it, right? So can humans fly? Most people would say no. Again, we're talking about unassisted. If you show me one that can levitate, that can flap their arms and fly away, then maybe I'll change my mind. I need one example of that happening to where you might go, hey, yeah, maybe humans can fly. All right, so that's super simple and unambiguous. Let's make it a little bit more difficult. Let's ask if something can tell time. Can something keep track of time in a way that would be useful to us, that would allow us to know what time it is? All right, so here's a picture of a bunch of metal gears and cogs and just metal pieces. Well, of course it can't tell time. It's just a bunch of gears and cogs. Right? We're denying its ability to tell time with the justaism religion. It's just a bunch of gears. Therefore, it can't tell time. Now, you can probably understand why that's a really bad take. Just saying that it's just a bunch of whatever doesn't mean it can't do something necessarily. Just by looking at the cogs and the wheels, we have no clue. Here's another thing. Can this tell time? Well, no, it's just a stick in the mud, right? It's just a little statue. How could it tell time? This is a sundial, by the way, so people have used this to be able to tell time for well, a long time. Saying it's just something that sticks out of the ground or sticks out of the plate doesn't negate its ability to tell time. Can this thing tell time? No, it's just a bunch of plastic pieces and a circuit board. Again, that doesn't make any sense. Just describing what it is doesn't negate the fact that it can have some ability. The only way to understand if it has that ability is by creating some test that is objective that we can all look at to see if it passes that test or it fails that test. For example, for a clock, you need probably a couple things that it has to have. One, it has to have regular and measurable change. So if this thing, assuming it's working, it will generally over time click and move the arrows, etc. Does this have, we're assuming these things work. Does it have a regular and measurable change? Yes, of course. Does this? Yes, of course. Does one of those digital watches with a quartz crystal, does that have regular measurable change? Yes, of course. And of course, you would have to be able to see or measure progress from that change. Can you do it with a clock? Yes. Can we see and measure change here? Yes, the arrows show us what the change is. Can we measure the change here? Yes, the shadow shows us and allows us to measure the change. And does it keep consistent intervals over time? If we double the time, does it double the measured change? For a digital watch, obviously. For a gear clock, obviously. So sundials are a little bit weird. It keeps consistent intervals within the day. Over time, that may change because of seasons, but it's still consistent in that we can adjust. We can still measure it. If we can kind of know the seasonality, where the sun is, etc., we can keep consistent time with this. So all these things have the ability to keep time, to measure time, so that we're able to use them to keep track of time. How are you going to phrase that? They have that ability, even though it's just a bunch of cogs, or it's just a stick sticking out of the ground, or it's just a bunch of plastic pieces in a circuit board and a quartz crystal, right? So it's just this or it's just that. It makes no difference. It either can or it cannot. So when we're talking about whether something has some ability or not, saying it's just something makes no sense. What's the right way to think about it? Well, we have a test. We test to see if it has that ability or no. So now hopefully I've convinced you that we need a test to see if something has the ability to do something or not. Let's say we want to know if humans can run a 4-minute mile. So we don't say, well, no, they can't because they're just carbon-based life forms. That's silly, right? We conduct a test. We make them run around a track. Let's say it's a mile track, and we see, we time it and we see if they can run it faster than 4 minutes. And we add some rules, right? So making sure that there's no loopholes, right? So they can't attach a rocket booster to their back. They can't cut through the grass, right? So we establish some sort of norms of the test, how that test should be conducted. By the way, we might disagree on some portions of that test, right? So I might say it's okay for them to, let's say, have some coffee before they attempt it. You might say, no stimulants allowed. That's totally fine. We can discuss that. But the point is, once we have a rule, we can all agree whether or not this test was passed. So next we've designed our test, and the first person goes up to the starting line. Let's say it's me, and I run the mile, and I come in, 10 minutes in. I don't know. What's a horrible time? I'm not going to do anywhere near a 4-minute mile, obviously. Tech YouTuber, we do not run. Anyways, so let's say I come in at a 9-minute mile. So does that mean that humans cannot do a 4-minute mile, right? So one example of a human not being able to do it, does that prove that humans can't do a 4-minute mile? No, it doesn't prove anything. Let's say we run a million people and none of them are able to break the 4-minute mile. Does that prove that humans can't do the 4-minute mile? No, that does not prove it. That's exactly what happened, by the way. If you know the history, for a long time, people thought there was some biological limit until one person broke that limit. And then a whole bunch of other people started breaking that limit. So all it takes is one person to pass that test, the 4-minute mile test, for us to say, okay, humans are able to do that. They have that ability. So by the way, here's another sort of answer to the person who was asking if LLMs can reason. So this person's saying, oh, I asked it for a file and I had to repeat the instructions 2-3 times, and it tells you that it provided the file, but there's no file. It means it has no real understanding of what a file is, right? So that argument is saying, I ran a 9-minute mile, therefore humans cannot run a 4-minute mile. So this result proves this impossible. That logic makes no sense. Right? A counterexample doesn't disprove that hypothesis, right? So I'm sure there's some unhealthy bird out there that can't fly, whereas normally that species of birds are able to fly. That one bird doesn't prove that birds can't fly. And there are tons of examples of people commenting examples of these large language models failing to do something or showing a lack of reasoning. People love doing this. It's meaningless. I can show you a broken clock. That doesn't mean that working clocks can't tell time. I can show you a human being doing something foolish. I probably do at least a few foolish things before noon most days, probably. My foolishness doesn't prove that humans can't reason. Me running a 9-minute mile doesn't prove that humans can't run a 4-minute mile. So most of the people answering, let's say 40% of them, maybe half, are falling into the foolishness of thinking that if they just say, oh, LMs are just this, then that somehow disproves that they have some ability, which is, as I've hopefully convinced you, that's absolute nonsense. The next biggest group, it shows basically situations where LMs fail to do something. So they fail to count the number of R's in strawberry, therefore they're useless. Here's an example of where it failed to do this particular task I asked, therefore it's useless, it can't reason. So those are arguments 1 and 2 in terms of the frequency that I see them. And the third sort of a logical fallacy, it's a little bit more subtle, and you might be falling into it right now as we speak. Here's the next silly mistake that people make, right? So right now in this video, hopefully I've proved to you or shown to you that this statement, this belief that LLMs can't reason, this is a silly belief to have. This is a foolish statement to make. Again, unless you have a specific test that can test for this, then that's a different story. But just believing this without any evidence, it's just not smart. And I think it's driven by fear. And again, I say this as somebody that's been doing these videos for a couple of years now. Every single one of these videos on this subject, you will get hate in the comments. I would not be surprised if there's a lot of hate in the comments of this video. This is very triggering for some people. This spikes a lot of emotions. This really triggers that amygdala center in our brain. Some people, some subsection of people, because they might have certain beliefs, certain understandings, where this triggers mortal fear. Because something about the machine being able to think and reason and understand similar to how humans can, something about that triggers some fear or negativity in some subsection of people. You know this is true. I'm sure you've seen this. Maybe it even made you uncomfortable. I think Ilya Sutskever encapsulated this perfectly. Very prescient. This is October 6, 2023. Like he knew where this was going. He says, if you value intelligence above all other human qualities, you're going to have a bad time, right? Because if you think that our worth is dictated by mainly intelligence and the machines become more intelligent, right? Then we, the humans, we become the dumb ones. We become the dumbest coworker. We become useless. Again, if intelligence is the only metric. So that's why you're seeing a lot of people having a bad time, because this strikes fear. That's why they make all those logical fallacies like playing the it's just ism game, or, ooh, I found a mistake it made, therefore, and then assuming something that mistake doesn't mean. And this is the third one. And this is the most kind of insidious, I guess. It's hard to spot, because if LMs can't reason, if that's a bad take, then what must be true? Well, LMs can reason, right? If this is the bad take, then logically the opposite is the good take. That's the smart take, the correct one. This also is probably not a great take right now, again, at least until we have a specific test that we can come up with to see if something can reason or not. It's a slightly better take. The reason it's slightly more defensible is, coming back to our 4-minute mile example, no matter how many people run around the track and fail to achieve a 4-minute mile, whether it's 10 people or 10 million or 10 billion, even if we make every single person run around the track that's ever been born, and none of them are able to get the 4-minute mile, none of that proves that humans are incapable of running a 4-minute mile. Whereas one person getting a 4-minute mile proves that they can't. The reason I bring this up is because oftentimes when you sort of talk to people that say LMs can't reason, and you say, okay, what's a test for reasoning, right? So they make this statement. They say, I believe LMs cannot reason. You say, okay, what's a test that we can run? Or at least a counterexample that would disprove this. So if you believe that humans can't run a 4-minute mile, what would be a case that would change your mind? For example, would a human being running a 3-minute mile, right? That would probably change your mind. So what would an LLM have to do that would show you that it can reason? Often what people do is they flip it on you. They're like, oh no, why don't you prove to me that it can reason, right? You think it can reason, you prove it. That argument also doesn't make any sense. Just because I'm saying that this is a bad take, that doesn't mean that I subscribe to the opposite take. I'm just saying that this is indefensible. You can't logically defend this position. And when people do give you some goalpost for the AI to cross, it's number one, they're always moving and they're moving fast as AI just keeps breaking one after the other. Or it's so vague as not to be able to be turned into an actual test that we can look at and say, did it pass or did it fail? Before AI beat world-class chess players, it was believed that when machine intelligence beats world-class chess players, that would be intelligence. After it happened, people were saying, nah, that's just brute force and heuristics. That's not intelligence. That's the way people said that trivia and various nuance in language could be thought of as intelligence. After LLMs and some previous AI models crushed that, we were like, nah, that's just statistics. That's not intelligence. Before recognizing objects that can be extremely diverse, like cats and people's faces and millions of different objects out there in the world, once AI reached the level that it would be able to recognize all of the objects, we thought, okay, that would be intelligence. After it did that, I was like, nah, that's just pattern matching. It can't explain what it sees. Same thing with Go, right? We thought that Go was different from chess because it required more intuitive understanding. It would be harder to beat with just brute force, statistics, heuristics, etc. Once it beat the human Lee Sedol and other grandmasters, including the famous Move 37, kind of this creative move that no human has thought of, we still dismissed it. We still said, no, it's just narrow intelligence. It's not humans, general intelligence. A lot of people would say that it can only work within its data set, right? So it can match patterns within its data set. AlphaFold and all of its offspring are cracking huge biology problems. It's adding to scientific progress. Look at the recent findings out of Google DeepMind with their cancer studies and Gemma, the open source family of models. It's hard to prove that it's not doing novel scientific research right now. It's still early, but you can't just say that it's working just within its data set because it's finding novel things that humans didn't find. We couldn't do it. It could. Some of the people in the comments have just asked their favorite large language models if it can understand things, if it can reason. There's a number of these examples. They screenshot the answer and they're like, haha, here's the truth, the answer, problem solved. But does that really prove anything? Like right now, reading these responses, I'm doubting that human beings can reason. So if you ask me right now, can human beings reason? I might be tempted to say it really doesn't seem so. Do humans understand things? No, obviously not, right? So would me saying that, would that be proof that that's the case? Probably not. And we're not even taking a reinforcement learning into account. Imagine every time you tweeted out that human beings can't reason or understand, like 1 million people would hit the like button. You'd probably be saying that a lot more. So is this answer just because of reinforcement learning, because of how these models are trained? It very well could be, as I'll show you in one of the later videos. There's an incredible research paper that's coming out kind of about this. And the point being that this means nothing. By the way, the comments that say things like, oh, thinking is tied to chemical processes and large language models don't have those, therefore they can't think. That's basically saying that this digital watch can't tell time because it doesn't have cogs and metal gears. Like I can show you how telling time uses metal gears. Look, I can show you. Therefore, this different approach cannot possibly work and have that same ability. So think about that for a second. What are these people arguing? I mean, a lot of these people are very smart, educated people. If I told them that this thing can't possibly tell time because it's just a bunch of metal gears, they would laugh at me, right? They're like, that's a stupid thing to say. There's more than one way to create something that can tell time, right? Digital watches, your computer, none of those have metal gears in them and keeping track of time. So why are these otherwise very smart people, why are they making such silly mistakes in their thinking? Well, it's very simple. They're not hearing the same thing that I'm hearing. When you and I hear this question, can LLMs reason? We probably hear it as is with no emotional response to it. Like I don't feel outraged or sad or like it's just a question. right? We're seeing that question as, can this object do this thing? Or does it have the ability to do this thing? It would be the same thing if you asked me, can a microwave run Doom? Or can your dog do tricks? And the answer to those questions is super simple, right? If I can get my microwave to run Doom, then yes, right? So if it runs Doom, if I can get it to do that, then yes, it can. If I can't get it to run Doom, then the answer is no, or maybe, right? So maybe it can't, or maybe I didn't figure out a way that it can, right? So if I can get it to work, it works. If I can't get it to work, then maybe it doesn't work. And can your dog do tricks? Same thing. If I see it doing a trick, then yes, it can do tricks. If I don't see it doing a trick, then maybe it can't, or maybe I just haven't seen it do a trick. I think that the people that are really struggling against this idea of whether LMs can reason or not, they're not hearing that question in the same way. So if they hear a question, can a microwave run Doom? A certain part of the brain logically thinks through it and understands it. Can your dog do tricks? Same thing. But you ask them, can LMs reason? No, that's a completely different part of the brain takes over. That part of the brain goes red alert. There's danger. Some deeper ancient part of our brain takes over. It's a lot more primal. It's a lot more emotional. And that part goes, well, if they can reason, then we're cooked. We're done. If they can reason, well, we're all dead. We're all unemployed. We're all not important. So therefore, the brain should create reasoning as to why the answer is no, they can't reason. The reason you can tell that this is happening is because oftentimes their answers don't really make sense from the perspective of, like, is this the question that they're answering? Because as I hopefully showed you, the answers that they have for this question, those answers don't fit. They don't make sense. What question are they answering? The question they're answering, kind of like the prompt that they prompt their own brain with, is the following. Explain why LLMs can't do the thing that makes me feel special. And look through that lens at the answers now, not just these, but anytime you encounter some irrational AI hate or anything like that, see if those answers make more sense if you view it from that perspective. So this first comment goes, humans produce new insights and they update their weights, right? So they're learning and they introspect on their reasoning process to evaluate it. By the way, Anthropic just released a paper called The Science of Introspection in Large Language Models. Oops. So LMs are just giant Plinko boards, right? So they're not special, I'm special. By the way, you can tell this is the case based on the fact that different groups of people respond very negatively to different abilities of AI. The responses are just as emotional and irrational as they are with other abilities, but it's just the thing that they focus on is different. So here's a person that used AI to create this animation, and I love the animation. It looks beautiful. If this was some sort of a anime cartoon, whatever, I would be kind of interested in seeing it. It looks great. This person retweets it. This person is against AI. You can tell it by what they write in their bio and other comments. So they're saying, let's reward that. So the person below is saying that I created this cinematic thing. This person that doesn't like AI. So he's an artist that doesn't like AI. So he's saying, let's reward that. You didn't make anything. You got a computer to make something for you. So MadVidPro retweeted this. That's actually how I saw it. MadVidPro does get, it seems like, attacked on Twitter by people that are against using AI to do various art, visual, video, etc. Seems like he catches a lot of flack from them. Not for anything bad he did, just for showcasing these tools. Me, and not being one to pass up a trolling opportunity, jump in here saying, as a bit of a painter myself, I feel the same about people using cameras to take photos. The camera does all the work. The person taking the photo contributes nothing. This photography fad won't last. Right, so I'm agreeing with Matt here, first and foremost, if that's not clear, kind of responding to this person that's sweet, right? So you have your computer do everything for you. You didn't do anything. So what that person's sort of referring to, how I understand it, is that you can take any piece of art and sort of think of it as high craftsmanship and low amount of craft, right? So if you were to sculpt something, there would be a lot of craft required, right? You have to slowly chisel everything out of stone versus something like AI art, where you type in a prompt and it generates usually 4 different versions for you that you can pick from. So that person's saying because it was low on the craft scale, that this is basically worthless. Here's the issue. There's tons of other art that's also low on that craft scale. Again, I used the photography example. Meaning with modern digital cameras, you point and you push a button that captures the image. You didn't make anything in the image, right? If you're taking a picture of a sunset, you didn't make the sunset. You didn't draw it. You didn't sculpt it. You didn't whatever. This is all it takes. You push the button. It might be argued that typing out a prompt takes more work than pushing a button on your camera. But obviously that reasoning doesn't make sense. I don't think that even the person that said it would apply that to photography. So for example, here's that same person, right? He took a picture of a sunrise on his phone. I don't think he would consider this a horrible thing, a bad thing, because it was low effort or low craft. He just held up his phone, pushed a button, and captured the image. Would the same reasoning apply? Would he agree with the fact that he didn't make anything? He got a smartphone to make something for him. Here he is saying that this is something that's absolutely horrible, unwatchable. I mean, I don't know. Is it really unwatchable? Doesn't seem that bad. Here's another shot made by AI. He's saying, I love how soulless this is. So is it soulless? I don't know. Point being is those statements don't really make sense if taken at face value. If this was made by a human director and looked exactly the same, I don't think he'd think it's soulless. If this was made by somebody or it was an animation of some sort, I don't think he would say to that person it's unwatchable. And I don't think he'd tell a photographer that took a picture of a sunset or something like that, oh, you didn't make anything. You had your camera make it for you. Those statements don't make sense through that lens. Now let's apply my lens. So I believe that the prompt that these people give their brains in these situations is this: explain why LMs can't do the thing that makes me feel special. What makes this person feel special? Where here he's saying that he's a 3D artist, 3D designer, right? And he pinned his work in Blender. So he creates these scenes by hand. So his craft, he's, I don't know, somewhere here, I don't know how much work he puts into it, but higher than taking a photo or AI art. This is like 3D modeling or whatever. This is what he feels proud of. This is what makes him feel special. So he pinned what I'm assuming is his progress from 2004 to 2005 using Blender, doing his craft. So when somebody creates an animation, that makes him feel less special. So he retweets it and says, oh, you didn't make it. A computer made it, right? So you shouldn't feel good about your work like I feel good about my work. This thing that Grok Imagine made, well, it's unwatchable. We can't watch it. And this little animation, it's soulless. Can we define what that means? Can he name something that's soulless that's made by humans? Is there some objective thing there that can be defined? Probably not. It doesn't make sense from that standpoint of taking it at face value. When that statement does make sense, if you think of it as this is the prompt for that person and their experience, and the output is what they said. Like, that's soulless. It's unwatchable. You didn't make it. The computer made it. Right. So in this case, we're not talking about LLMs. We're talking about, if he feels special by using Blender to create art and somebody can create similar art using AI, right? So he's explaining why those people can't do the things that make him feel special. Recently, I posted a study that Suno music, AI music, is for most people getting indistinguishable from real music. I got a lot of comments. The people with the strongest negative response to that study, that paper, which, by the way, again, it wasn't insulting to anyone. It didn't say anything offensive. It just said, hey, look, the average person can no longer differentiate between AI music and music made by humans. So a lot of the negative responses were by people in the music industry, people responding to AI art. Like if it's a graphic art, then it's people that make graphics, 3D graphics, animations, etc. People that respond, negatively to this idea that LLMs can reason. I mean, well, this person is a scientist, a game designer, player, nerd, and occasional writer. And I've seen this for the last couple years, both on X and YouTube. Anytime that I show a particular aspect of AI getting better, especially if it seems like it's getting close to human level, the outcry, the kind of reactive responses, they usually come from people who do that, or specifically, I think, really pride themselves on doing that thing. So if I post about AI doing music, musicians are mad. Coding, coders are mad. Again, not everyone. It's a very special subsection, which might be obvious, but again, the big point here that I'm trying to make is that the way in which those responses are made, they're weird, they're different, they're not often rational. If you ask a musician to rate a human-made piece of music, there's a certain words and phrases and descriptions that they'll use. They'll say whether they like it or not. They'll talk about the technique. They might talk about like whether they like the style or not. With visual art, they might say how it made them feel. They might talk about the colors. There's certain ways that people talk about code, whether it's clean, whether it works, whether it's well commented. So when humans judge other humans' outputs, we have a certain way that we talk about it and judge it and describe whether we think it's good or not. And on the other side, when we show people the outputs from AI, I think a lot of people, probably most people, maybe 80% of people, I'm just guessing, I have no idea what this number is. We tend to analyze that or think about it just like we would about anything else. So can LLMs reason? We kind of process that question in the same way like we would process, can birds fly? Or can this thing run Doom? But for some percent of the people, talking about these things tends to trigger that fear response. And again, it seems like what they say about that output, that piece of art or music, or that question relating to AI, whatever it might be, that gets morphed to be something completely different. And you see these people, when they talk about AI outputs, they almost make up new terminology. They create new ways of describing these outputs. For AI, it'll be, there's no soul, there's no depth. People say AI music sounds tinny or shallow. People say that AI writing doesn't have meaning, right? Because there's no lived experience behind it. Here's a chart I found on LinkedIn, right? So this is why readers don't like AI writing. People just hate AI writing because it's just text, right? Whereas for human writing, you don't have text, you have subtext. You also have author intention. You have contextual impact and dialectical participation. You have this whole like iceberg underneath the surface. So human writing is all of this, and AI is just this. So that's why we don't like AI writing. There's just one tiny problem with that belief statement, iceberg diagram. That is that humans prefer AI over human written poems. And this is true for a lot of other writing. We also can't tell AI music from regular music. I wish they did a comparison of which one people think is better. I think AI music is at some point going to become more liked by average people. But with writing, with poems, keep in mind, it's not just poems. There's tons of other examples of this. But humans can't distinguish between AI writing and human writing. If asked, like, which one is which, they don't know. But they do rate the AI poems more favorably. They like them more. So what that means is if you show people this picture, people are like, oh, well, human writing is clearly better. Look at all the stuff that it has. But, and this is super important that everyone understands this, because this is true across all AI generated outputs, whether it's text, written text, poems, or audio, visual, what have you. When we don't give you hints as to which one you should prefer more, where you have to select it blind, people go, ooh, I like this one better. They select the AI one more. And then when asked why, so for example, when we take poems by famous human poems versus AI poetry, people prefer AI poetry. Why? Well, it's easier to understand with clearer themes and subjects, even those written in ways that intentionally emulated the forms of famous poets. When asked to rate the poems on rhythm, emotional impact, and aesthetic beauty, participants consistently preferred pieces written by AI over those written by humans. This is the big point. Their assessment and ratings dropped when they were told the poem was AI generated, showing a general bias against AI created pieces. So if you are asked if you like a certain piece of writing or text or music or whatever, and you describe what you like about it, what you don't, why it's clear or unclear, again, whether you like it or not, then you really are describing whether you like it or not. If, however, you're told that it's a piece generated by AI and all of a sudden your whole language changes and you're talking about soul and depth, and if you have to create whole new categories to try to say that AI writing is worse than human writing, then it seems like you're lying to yourself. And you're also lying to yourself if you can spot the logical fallacy. If I say, oh, this can't measure time because it's just a bunch of gears. If you understand why that's not a good argument, but you can't catch the fact that saying LLMs are just whatever, stochastic parrot, why that's not a good argument, then you're kind of deceiving yourself. And whatever you do, above all, don't lie to yourself. That's Fyodor Dostoevsky. And the reason I want to talk about this is because the next few years, the next 5 years are going to be extremely, extremely important. People are going to lose their minds. People will sound deranged and that they will not be able to see their own derangement because they're lying to themselves about what they're perceiving. I think for all of us, it makes sense to make sure that we're being very rational about this and not being deceived by either our own fears and insecurities. If AI is getting good to the point where it can affect something that you're good at, that you're doing, make sure you have some specific tests to see, can it do it? What is it good at? What is it bad at? Don't invent some lofty new abstract concepts to try to prove to yourself that it can't replace you. And also pay attention to people that are in a certain profession saying how AI will never affect that particular profession. Make sure they're not comparing it to just like the top 1% of that profession. If AI can code better than 50% of software developers, that's going to have a massive impact. It doesn't have to be in the top 1%. The average person has a hard time distinguishing between AI music and human-made music. Their guesses are like coin tosses. It's basically 50-50. So if you're trying to understand how that will affect the music market, that's the information you should be looking at. You shouldn't compare AI music to your favorite band and see how you feel about it. You shouldn't compare it to the top 1% most talented musicians that have ever lived. The study says that the average person can't tell the difference. Based on that, how do you think that's going to affect the music market? As AI expands and reaches more and more industries and areas, both overreacting and being kind of crazy about it or underreacting and trying to pretend it doesn't exist will probably lead to some issues. Above all, don't lie to yourself. Really, the only job that I think is safe from AI is being a YouTuber. AI can't do this job. You need lived experience. You need like presence on camera. You need to be present. You need to have a certain spunk, some grit. You got to have soul. You need a certain X factor, an aura, a vibe, energy, or a frequency and an essence, a certain inner light. You need heart, a certain magnetism or panache. You just need a certain je ne sais quoi. But everybody else is in trouble. Oh, and one final thing. If you were wondering what my personal belief is, whether LLMs can or cannot reason, here's my answer. Here's the definition of reason: the power of the mind to think, understand, and form judgments by a process of logic. Okay, so we're doing those things by a process of logic. Makes sense. What does logic mean? Logic means reasoning conducted. So to summarize, reason is to think using logic, the process of logic. And logic, of course, means to reason, right? To do the process of reasoning. So I hope that answers your question. My name is Wes Roth, and I'll see you in the next one.